The red warning lights painted everything in bloody shadows as David Ross ran through the corridors of his ship. Behind him, his boots echoed against metal floors while emergency sirens wailed their urgent song. Something had gone very wrong in the outer rim of the Andros system, and whatever it was had been calling for help for the last 3 hours. David wiped sweat from his forehead as he reached the main deck. His crew was already busy at their stations, fingers dancing over glowing screens and switches. The smell of hot electronics and recycled air filled his nose. Through the large front window, space looked peaceful and dark, filled with distant stars that twinkled like tiny diamonds. But somewhere out there, someone was dying. "Report," David said to his communications officer, a young woman named Patricia who always kept her brown hair tied back in a tight bun. "It's a Drakmori ship." "Sir," Patricia said, her voice tight with worry. "The signal is very weak now. I think they don't have much time left." David felt his stomach drop. The Drakmori were legendary throughout the galaxy. They looked like dragons from old Earth stories, with scales that shimmered like metal and eyes that burned like fire. They were proud warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds. Most importantly, they hated everyone who wasn't Drakmori. In 300 years of space travel, no human had ever been invited onto a Drakmori ship. No Drakmori had ever asked humans for help. "Are you sure it's really them?" David asked. Patricia nodded and played the message again. A deep rumbling voice spoke in the ancient Drakmori language, but David's computer translated the words into English. "Help! Anyone dying? Precious cargo. Must survive. Please." The word please hit David like a punch to the chest. Drakmori never said please. They demanded, they ordered, they threatened. They did not beg. How far? David asked his pilot, an older man named Gary who had been flying ships since before David was born. 20 minutes if we push the engines hard, Gary replied. "But sir, this could be a trap. Drakmori don't ask for help. They take what they want." David understood Gary's worry. Every human child learned stories about Drakmori raids. They would attack without warning, take whatever they wanted, and leave nothing but burning ships behind. But something felt different about this message. The voice sounded weak, desperate, and very afraid. "Take us there," David decided, "but keep our weapons ready." Gary nodded and his hands moved over the controls. The ship turned in space and began moving toward the source of the distress call. David felt the familiar push against his body as the engines worked harder. Through the window, the stars began to move faster as they picked up speed. As they traveled, David thought about his crew. There were 12 people on his ship, all good friends who had been exploring space together for 5 years. They trusted him to keep them safe. He hoped he wasn't making a terrible mistake. "I can see it," Gary announced after 18 minutes. "Oh no." David looked through the window and saw the Drakmori ship. It was huge, at least 5 times bigger than their own vessel, and shaped like a sleeping dragon with wings folded against its sides. But something was very wrong. Parts of the ship were missing, blown away by some terrible explosion. Fires burned in several places and debris floated all around it like a cloud of metal snow. "Any life signs?" David asked Dr. Susan Miller, his medical officer. Susan looked at her instruments with a worried expression. "Very faint. Maybe one person, but I can't be sure." David made his decision. "Gary, take us close to their docking bay. Patricia, tell them we're coming to help. Susan, get your medical kit ready." 10 minutes later, David was floating through space in his protective suit, connected to his ship by a long safety line. The Drakmori vessel was even more damaged up close. Huge holes had been torn in its hull, and the beautiful decorations that covered most Drakmori ships were blackened and melted. David found an airlock that still worked and managed to get inside. The corridors of the ship were dark and filled with smoke. His flashlight cut through the gloom as he moved carefully toward the life sign that Susan had detected. He found her in what looked like a command room. She was clearly Drakmori, but smaller than the warriors David had seen in pictures. Her scales were a deep blue color, almost black, and they seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. Blood covered one side of her body, and her breathing was very shallow. In her arms, she held something round and smooth that glowed with soft, warm light. An egg. When the Drakmori woman saw David, her eyes opened wide with surprise. She tried to sit up but fell back with a gasp of pain. "Human?" she whispered in heavily accented English. Why are you here?" "You called for help," David said gently, kneeling beside her. "We came as fast as we could." The woman stared at him for a long moment. Then, to David's amazement, tears began to run down her scaled cheeks. "I am Elder Kieran," she said slowly. "My ship, attacked by raiders. Everyone else dead." David looked around the ruined command room. He could see other shapes in the darkness, other Drakmori who had not survived the attack. "We can help you," David said. "My doctor can treat your injuries." Kieran shook her head weakly. "Too late for me. But this—" She lifted the glowing egg slightly. "This must live. This is Babloo, my little one." David stared at the egg. Inside, he could see something moving, a shadow that seemed to dance in the warm light. "Your child?" he asked. "All Drakmori are warriors," Kieran said, her voice getting weaker. "We raise our young to fight, to conquer, to show no mercy. But you humans, I have watched you. You raise your young with love. You teach them to help others, to be kind." David felt confused. "I don't understand." Kieran struggled to lift the egg toward him. "Take Babloo. Raise him as you would raise a human child. Teach him your ways, not ours. He will be different. Special." "I can't take your child," David said, shocked. "You need medical help. You can recover." "No," Kieran whispered. "I am dying. I can feel it. But Babloo can live if you take him. Please, human. Your people love their children. We only make them into weapons." David looked at the egg again. The movement inside was getting stronger, and he could swear he heard a faint sound like tiny claws scratching against the shell. "Why me?" David asked. "Why humans?" Kieran smiled, and for a moment her fierce features looked gentle. "Because you came when we called for help. Because you are here, risking your lives for strangers. No other species would do this. Only humans love so foolishly." The egg began to crack. A small piece of shell fell away, and David saw a tiny golden eye looking up at him. The eye was bright and curious, with no trace of the anger he expected from a Drakmori. "Promise me," Kieran said, her voice barely audible now. "Promise you will love him." David looked at the dying woman, then at the egg that was hatching in her arms. He thought about his crew, about the danger this would bring, about how the entire galaxy would react to humans raising a Drakmori child. Then the tiny golden eye blinked at him, and David felt his heart melt. "I promise," he said. Kieran smiled one last time and placed the egg in David's hands. It was warm and surprisingly light. More cracks appeared in the shell, and David could hear soft chirping sounds from inside. "Thank you," Kieran whispered, and then she was gone. David sat in the dark Drakmori ship, holding an alien egg that would change everything. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, unaware that the galaxy had just taken its first step toward a very different future. 3 weeks had passed since Babloo hatched, and David's life had turned completely upside down. The tiny dragon was no bigger than a house cat, covered in golden scales that sparkled like jewels when light hit them. His wings were still too small for flying, but he could flutter them fast enough to hover for a few seconds. Most surprising of all, Babloo was incredibly smart. David discovered this on the 3rd day when he found Babloo trying to use the computer terminal in his quarters. The little dragon had somehow figured out how to turn it on and was poking at the screen with one tiny claw, making frustrated chirping sounds when nothing happened. "What are you doing, little guy?" David asked, sitting down next to Babloo. To his amazement, Babloo looked up at him and made a series of clicks and whistles that sounded almost like language. David had heard Drakmori speak before, and this was definitely not their normal speech. But it wasn't random noise either. Dr. Susan Miller was fascinated when David told her about it. She was a thin woman with gray hair who had studied alien biology for 20 years, but she had never seen anything like Babloo. "Most reptilian species don't develop complex communication for months," she explained as she watched Babloo play with a small ball that Gary had made for him. "But look at him. He's trying to teach us his own language." It was true. Babloo would point at things and make specific sounds, then look at the humans expectantly. When David said ball and held up the toy, Babloo repeated the word back to him with perfect pronunciation. Within a week, Babloo had learned over 50 English words. Within 2 weeks, he was speaking in simple sentences. "David good," Babloo would say when David brought him food. "Babloo happy." Susan nice. Gary funny. The crew quickly fell in love with the little dragon. Patricia taught him to play simple card games. Gary showed him how the ship's engines worked, and Babloo listened with intense concentration. Luis Hernandez, their engineer, let Babloo help with small repairs. and the dragon proved to have an amazing ability to squeeze into tiny spaces that humans couldn't reach. But it was Dr. Miller who made the most important discovery. "David, you need to see this," she said one morning, calling him to the medical bay. Her voice sounded worried. David found her standing over a table covered with papers and computer printouts. Babloo was curled up nearby, sleeping peacefully in a small bed that Patricia had made for him. "What's wrong?" David asked. "I've been studying Babloo's brain scans," Susan said, showing him images on her computer screen. "Look at this. See these neural patterns? They're not just learning our language or our customs. His brain is literally changing to match human thought patterns." David looked at the colorful brain scans but didn't understand what he was seeing. "Is that bad?" "I don't know," Susan admitted. "In most species, basic behavior patterns are fixed at birth. A wolf will always hunt in packs. A bird will always try to fly. But Babloo is different. His brain is like soft clay, reshaping itself based on who raises him." "What does that mean?" "It means that whatever we teach him now will become part of who he is forever. If we teach him to be kind, he'll be kind. If we teach him to be violent..." Susan didn't finish the sentence. David looked over at the sleeping dragon. Babloo's tiny chest rose and fell peacefully, and one wing was wrapped around a small stuffed animal that Patricia had given him. "We'll teach him good things," David decided. "We'll show him how to be helpful and caring." But teaching Babloo wasn't always easy. The little dragon was still a Drakmori, and some instincts couldn't be changed. David learned this the hard way during Babloo's 4th week with them. It happened during dinner. The crew was eating together in the common room, sharing stories and laughing as they always did. Babloo was sitting on David's lap, eating small pieces of fruit and chattering about something he had seen earlier. Suddenly, Babloo stopped talking. His golden eyes went wide and his small body went very still. David felt the temperature around them get warmer. "Babloo, what's wrong?" David asked, but Babloo didn't answer. He was staring at something across the room and his breathing was getting faster. The air around them continued to heat up. Patricia noticed it first. "David, is it just me or is it getting hot in here?" That's when David realized what was happening. Babloo was about to breathe fire. "Everyone get back," David shouted, standing up quickly. But it was too late. Babloo opened his mouth and a stream of bright orange flames shot across the room. The fire hit the wall where their food storage was kept and suddenly half their supplies were burning. The smell of smoke filled the air, and emergency alarms began to wail. Gary and Luis ran to get fire extinguishers while Patricia helped Susan move to safety. David was left holding a very confused and frightened little dragon who was making distressed chirping sounds. "Fire bad," Babloo cried, his voice small and scared. "Babloo sorry. Babloo very sorry." It took 20 minutes to put out the fire. When they were done, half their food was gone and the wall was badly damaged. The crew stood around looking at the mess while Babloo hid behind David's legs, trembling with fear. "Well," Gary said finally, "I guess we know he's definitely a Drakmori." David knelt down and gently picked up Babloo. The little dragon was shaking and had tears in his golden eyes. "Babloo sorry," he whispered. "Babloo didn't mean to. Fire just came out." David felt his heart break. In Drakmori culture, he knew, a young dragon who couldn't control his fire would be punished severely. But David wasn't Drakmori. "It's okay," David said softly, holding Babloo close. "Everyone makes mistakes when they're learning." "We're not angry with you." "Not angry?" Babloo asked, looking up with confusion. "No, little guy. We're not angry, but we need to help you learn to control your fire so this doesn't happen again." David spent the next hour teaching Babloo breathing exercises that humans use to stay calm. Deep breath in, hold for 3 seconds, slow breath out. It was something David's own father had taught him when he was a child and had trouble controlling his temper. To everyone's amazement, it worked. When Babloo felt the fire building up inside him, he would stop and do his breathing exercises. The fire would fade away and Babloo would smile proudly. "I did it," he would say. "No fire!" But the incident had consequences that David hadn't expected. 3 days later, Patricia picked up a message from the Galactic Council. It was marked urgent and was addressed to David personally. "They know," Patricia said, her face pale as she read the message. "Someone reported that we have Babloo. The Council is ordering us to return him to Drakmori space immediately." David read the message over her shoulder. It was formal and cold, full of legal language about stolen Drakmori property. and violation of interspecies treaties. At the bottom was a signature he recognized, Council Director Harrison, a man who had never liked humans very much. "They're giving us 3 days to comply," Patricia continued. "If we don't, they'll send ships to take him by force." David looked across the room where Babloo was playing with Luis, the two of them building something out of spare parts. Babloo was laughing, a sound like tiny bells ringing while Luis pretended to be confused about which piece went where. "Sir?" Patricia asked. "What do we do?" David watched Babloo for another moment. The little dragon had learned to say please and thank you. He helped clean up after meals. When Susan had fallen and hurt her ankle the day before, Babloo had stayed by her side all evening, bringing her water and telling her silly jokes to make her feel better. This wasn't a weapon or a creature raised for war. This was a child who trusted them, who loved them, who was learning every day to be kind and helpful and good. "We run," David decided. "Set course for the outer rim." "We're not giving him back." Patricia stared at him. "David, if we do this, we'll be fugitives. The entire galaxy will be hunting us." "Then we better make sure they don't catch us," David replied. As their ship changed course and headed away from Council space, David picked up Babloo and held him close. The little dragon curled up against his chest, completely trusting and completely innocent. Behind them, David knew, ships were already being sent to hunt them down. Ahead of them lay empty space and uncertainty. But for now, in this moment, Babloo was safe and happy and loved, and that was enough. The asteroid field stretched out in all directions like a maze made of floating rocks and ice. David gripped his chair as Gary piloted their ship through the dangerous space, dodging chunks of stone the size of buildings. Behind them, 3 council ships were getting closer, their weapons charging up to fire. "They're gaining on us," Patricia announced, her voice tight with fear. 12 minutes until they're in firing range. Babloo was strapped into a special seat that Luis had built for him. The little dragon was now the size of a medium dog, his golden scales having darkened to a rich bronze color as he grew. He watched the asteroid spin past their windows with fascination rather than fear. "Pretty rocks," Babloo said, then looked at David with concern. "Why are the other ships chasing us? Are they playing tag?" David's heart ached. Even after 6 months of running from the authorities, Babloo still saw the best in everything. The little dragon couldn't understand why anyone would want to hurt them. "Something like that," David said, not wanting to frighten Babloo with the truth. "I can see a way through," Gary announced. "There's a gap between those 2 big asteroids, but it's going to be very tight. I'm not sure our pursuers will be able to follow." David was about to answer when alarms started blaring. A 4th ship had appeared ahead of them, cutting off their escape route. This one was different from the council vessels. It was dark red and shaped like an angry bird of prey. "Drakmori warship," Patricia said, her voice barely a whisper. David felt ice form in his stomach. They had been running from the council for months, but the Drakmori were different. The Drakmori wanted Babloo back, and they didn't care about following council laws or taking prisoners. "David," Babloo said, his voice small and worried. "Those are my people's ships, aren't they?" "Yes, little guy," David admitted. Babloo was quiet for a moment, thinking. "They want to take me away from you." "We won't let that happen," David promised. But as the Drakmori ship moved closer, David wasn't sure how they could keep that promise. They were trapped between council ships and Drakmori warriors. In the middle of an asteroid field with nowhere to run, that's when something amazing happened. Babloo unbuckled himself from his seat and walked to the front of the ship. He placed his small claws against the window and closed his eyes. David could feel the air around Babloo getting warmer, but not in the dangerous way it had during his early fire-breathing accidents. This felt different, controlled. "Babloo, what are you doing?" Susan asked. "Protecting my family," Babloo said simply. A golden glow began to surround the little dragon. The glow spread outward, flowing over the walls and ceiling of their ship like liquid light. David watched in amazement as the energy field extended beyond their vessel, creating a shimmering bubble around them. "Impossible," Gary breathed. "Look at the scanners." David looked at Gary's instruments and saw something that shouldn't have been possible. The energy field that Babloo was creating was deflecting the asteroids around them. Chunks of rock that should have smashed into their ship were bouncing harmlessly off the golden barrier. More importantly, the field was hiding them. On the scanner display, David could see that their ship had simply disappeared from everyone else's instruments. How is he doing this? Susan whispered. I don't know, David replied, watching Babloo with wonder. But he's protecting us. The Drakmori ship passed right by them, its sensors unable to detect their presence. The council ships did the same, searching frantically for a vessel that was hidden right in front of them. After an hour of confused searching, all 4 pursuing ships gave up and left the asteroid field. When Babloo finally let the energy field fade, he collapsed into David's arms, exhausted but smiling. Did I do good? He asked sleepily. You did amazing, David said, holding the tired little dragon close. But how did you know you could do that? I didn't, Babloo admitted. I just wanted to keep you safe. And somehow I knew what to do. Dr. Miller ran every scan she could think of, but she couldn't explain what had happened. According to everything she knew about Drakmori biology, Babloo shouldn't have been able to create protective energy fields for at least 50 years. It's like he's developing abilities that normal Drakmori don't have, she told David privately. Or maybe he's developing them much faster because of how we've raised him. What do you mean? Think about it, Susan said. Normal Drakmori children are taught to use their power to attack and conquer. But Babloo's first instinct was to protect. He's not thinking like a traditional Drakmori warrior. He's thinking like a human who happens to have dragon powers. 2 days later, they received a distress call that would test Susan's theory. They were traveling through a quiet sector of space when Patricia picked up an emergency signal. A passenger transport was under attack by pirates. The ship was carrying over 200 civilians, including many families with children. The transport's weapons are damaged, Patricia reported. They can't fight back. The pirates are demanding they surrender or be destroyed. David looked at his crew. They were explorers, not fighters. Their ship had some defensive weapons, but nothing that could match a pirate vessel built for combat. We have to help them, David decided. Sir, Gary said carefully, I know you want to do the right thing, but we're outgunned. If we attack the pirates, they'll destroy us and the transport. David knew Gary was right. It was a hopeless situation. But as he tried to think of another option, he felt a small claw touch his hand. I can help, Babloo said quietly. David looked down at the little dragon. Over the past few months, Babloo had grown to about the size of a large dog, but he was still just a child. Babloo, this is too dangerous. I won't fight, Babloo promised. But I can protect people, like I protected us in the asteroids. David hesitated. He didn't want to put Babloo in danger. But 200 innocent people were about to die, and Babloo might be their only hope. All right, David decided. But you stay close to me, and if I say retreat, we retreat immediately. Gary piloted their ship toward the attack. The pirate vessel was large and ugly, covered with extra weapons and armor plating. It was firing on the passenger transport, which was trying to escape but was too slow and too damaged. Pirate ship, this is David Ross, David announced over the communication system. Stop your attack immediately and withdraw. Laughter came back through the radio. Little explorer ship, you are funny. Go away or we will destroy you too. I warned you, David said, then nodded to Babloo. The little dragon took a deep breath and extended his energy field, just like he had done in the asteroids. But this time, instead of hiding their ship, he stretched the protective barrier to cover the damaged transport as well. The pirates' weapons fired, but their energy blasts bounced harmlessly off Babloo's golden shield. The pirate captain's laughter stopped abruptly. What is this? The pirate demanded. How are you doing this? Babloo didn't answer. Instead, he did something that amazed everyone watching. Very carefully, very gently, he used his energy field to push against the pirate ship. Not to damage it, but to move it away from the transport. The pirate ship found itself being slowly but irresistibly pushed backward, unable to get close enough to the transport to cause any more damage. This is impossible, the pirate captain shouted. No ship has this kind of power. You're right, David replied calmly. No ship does. Now leave these people alone or things will get much worse for you. The pirates tried firing everything they had, but nothing could penetrate Babloo's shield. Eventually, frustrated and frightened by forces they couldn't understand, they gave up and fled. The moment the pirates were gone, Babloo collapsed again, even more exhausted than before. But he was smiling. Everyone safe? He asked weakly. Everyone's safe, David confirmed. The transport is already thanking us. You saved 200 people today. Good, Babloo said, and fell asleep in David's arms. But saving the transport had consequences. The rescue had been broadcast across the emergency networks. and soon everyone in the galaxy had seen the footage. A small exploration ship with impossible defensive abilities, energy shields that could protect multiple vessels, and most shocking of all, a power that chose to protect rather than destroy. 3 days later, Patricia intercepted a message that was being sent across Drakmori space. It was from someone calling himself War Leader Thorgak, and it was addressed to all Drakmori warriors. "My brothers," the message began, "we have all seen the shameful display, one of our own, corrupted by human weakness, using the power of dragons to protect our enemies instead of destroying them. This cannot be allowed to continue." The message went on to declare that any Drakmori who had been contaminated by contact with other species was a traitor. Thorgak called for volunteers to join him in hunting down Babloo and making an example of him. He's trying to start a war, David realized. But what worried him more was the last part of the message. "The humans have stolen our future emperor," Thorgak declared. "The heir to the Drakmori throne learns their poisonous ways of peace and mercy. This weakness will spread to our young warriors if we do not act. The human ship must be found, and the abomination they have created must be destroyed." David looked at Babloo, who was playing quietly nearby, unaware of the deadly forces gathering against him. "Future Emperor?" David whispered. Susan nodded grimly. "I think we've been raising more than just any Drakmori child. I think we've been raising their prince." The ancient ship hung in space like a dead giant, its dark hull covered with strange symbols that hurt to look at for too long. David had never seen anything like it, and neither had anyone else in the galaxy. The vessel was huge, easily 10 times the size of the largest Drakmori warship, and it was completely silent. "How old do you think it is?" Patricia asked, staring at the mysterious craft through their view screen. Dr. Miller was running every scan she could. "The metal shows signs of extreme age. Thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands. But David, this is impossible. No known species has ever built ships this large." They had discovered the derelict by accident while hiding from their pursuers in an uncharted star system. For 8 months now, they had been running from both council ships and Drakmori hunters. Babloo had grown during their travels, now standing as tall as David's waist, with bronze scales that gleamed like polished metal and intelligent golden eyes that seemed to understand far more than they should. "What do you think, little guy?" David asked Babloo, who was studying the ancient ship with intense concentration. "It feels old," Babloo said slowly. "Very, very old and sad. Like it's been waiting for someone to find it." Luis was examining the scanner readings. "There's still power somewhere inside. Not much, but enough to keep life support running in some sections." "Any signs of crew?" David asked. "Nothing alive," Luis replied. "But there are chambers that might have been living quarters. And David, some of the rooms are huge. Whatever built this ship was much bigger than any of us." David was about to suggest they explore the vessel when their proximity alarms began screaming. 3 ships were approaching fast, and they were not trying to hide their presence. "Council peacekeeping vessel," Patricia announced, reading the identification signals. "And 2 others, oh no. 1 Drakmori warship and 1 human diplomatic cruiser." David felt his heart sink. They had been found, and this time there was nowhere to run. The 3 approaching ships represented every major power in the galaxy, and they had all come for Babloo. "Incoming message," Patricia said. It's addressed to Babloo personally." Everyone turned to look at the young dragon, who had grown very still. His golden eyes were wide with an emotion David had never seen in them before. "Fear." "Put it through," David said. The view screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at 3 faces. The first was Council Director Harrison, a thin man with cold eyes who had been hunting them for months. The second was Captain Rebecca Stone of the Human Diplomatic Corps, a woman David recognized from news broadcasts. The third face made Babloo gasp. It was clearly Drakmori, but unlike any David had seen before. This one was massive, with black scales and burning red eyes. Scars covered his face and neck, and when he smiled, his teeth looked like knives. "Greetings, little prince," the scarred Drakmori said, his voice like grinding stone. "I am War Leader Thorgak. I have come to take you home." "I am home," Babloo said quietly, moving closer to David. Thorgak's smile disappeared. "You have been poisoned by human weakness, child. But do not worry. We will cure you of this disease called mercy." Director Harrison cleared his throat. "War Leader Thorgak, Captain Stone, we agreed to handle this diplomatically. The child must be returned to Drakmori custody according to interspecies law." The child has a name, David said angrily. His name is Babloo and he's not property to be handed around. Captain Stone leaned forward. Commander Ross, I understand your attachment, but this situation has created a crisis. The Drakmori are threatening war if their heir is not returned. You must see reason. My only reason is protecting a child who was entrusted to my care, David replied. Thorgak laughed, a sound like metal scraping against stone. Child, look at him, human. He is nearly grown. In 1 year, he will be old enough to claim his birthright as heir to the Drakmori throne. Will you teach him to rule with your pathetic human weakness? I'll teach him to rule with wisdom and compassion, David shot back. Wisdom? Thorgak's eyes blazed brighter. Compassion? These are not the ways of dragons. These are the ways of prey. Babloo stepped forward, his young voice clear and strong. What if I could prove that wisdom and compassion are stronger than violence? All three faces on the screen looked surprised. Thorgak recovered first. Prove it? How would a child prove such foolishness? Babloo looked up at David, then back at the screen. A test. You choose what kind of test, but we both take it. If I win using human methods, you leave me alone. If you win, I'll come with you willingly. David grabbed Babloo's shoulder. Absolutely not. I won't let you risk yourself like that. But Thorgak was grinning now, showing all his sharp teeth. Yes, I accept this challenge. And I know exactly what the test should be. He gestured toward the ancient ship. The derelict contains technology from the builders, the first species to travel between stars. Their knowledge could make whoever possesses it the most powerful force in the galaxy. 2 tests, little prince. First, who can reach the technology fastest. Second, who can make better use of it. The winner takes all. Director Harrison looked alarmed. War leader. That technology is too dangerous to be left to any single species. The Council should oversee any exploration of the derelict. The Council has no claim here, Thorgak replied. This is between dragons. Captain Stone turned to David. Commander Ross, please reconsider. This isn't just about the child anymore. That ancient technology could destabilize the entire galaxy. But Babloo had already made his decision. I accept, he said firmly. 4 hours later, David found himself wearing a spacesuit and following Babloo through the dark corridors of the ancient ship. They had agreed that each side could bring a small team, so David had chosen Gary and Luis to accompany them. Thorgak had brought 2 Drakmori warriors who looked like they could tear through metal with their bare claws. The inside of the ship was even stranger than the outside. The corridors were huge, built for beings much larger than any current species. The walls were covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change when no one was looking directly at them. The power source is this way, Luis said, reading his scanner, about half a kilometer ahead. They moved carefully through the ancient halls, their flashlights cutting through darkness that had lasted for thousands of years. Behind them, David could hear Thorgak and his warriors moving much faster, not bothering to be careful about potential dangers. David, Babloo said quietly as they walked, I know you're angry with me for accepting this challenge. I'm terrified, David admitted. Not angry, terrified. I had to do it, Babloo continued. If I don't prove that human ways work, then other Drakmori children will never learn them. They'll grow up thinking that violence is the only answer to everything. David looked at the young dragon walking beside him. Babloo was right, of course. He usually was. The little dragon had learned human wisdom so well that he often saw solutions that adults missed. They reached the ship's central chamber just minutes behind Thorgak's team. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above them. In the center stood a pillar of crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Around the pillar, holographic displays showed star maps and writing in languages no one had ever seen. The Builder Archives, Gary breathed. This is their entire knowledge base. Thorgak was already approaching the crystal pillar, his warriors flanking him. The technology will make the Drakmori unstoppable, he declared. We will use it to conquer every world in the galaxy. Wait, Babloo said, stepping forward. That's not how this works. Thorgak turned, annoyed. What do you mean, child? Babloo walked past the war leader and stood in front of the crystal. As he approached, the holographic displays changed, showing new images and symbols. The builders didn't just leave their technology here, Babloo said, reading the alien text with impossible ease. They left a test. Whoever wants to claim their knowledge must prove they're worthy of it. David stared at Babloo in amazement. How can you read that? I don't know, Babloo admitted, but I can understand it. The builders were like humans, David. They believed that wisdom was more important than power. Thorgak snorted. More human weakness. Stand aside, child. I will take what belongs to the strong. But when Thorgak reached for the crystal, nothing happened. The holographic displays showed the same message over and over. Prove your worth. It wants us to show how we would use the technology, Babloo explained. Not just take it. For the next hour, they tried everything. Thorgak demonstrated his strength by lifting massive pieces of debris. His warriors showed their combat skills. But the crystal remained inactive. Finally, Babloo approached the pillar alone. Instead of trying to take anything, he simply placed his small clawed hand on the crystal and spoke. I don't want your technology for myself, he said. I want to use it to help everyone. Humans, Drakmori, all the species in the galaxy. We can learn to work together instead of fighting each other. The crystal blazed with brilliant light. The holographic displays came alive, showing incredible technologies that could solve hunger, cure diseases, and bring peace to countless worlds. For a moment, David glimpsed what the galaxy could become. Then just as suddenly the light faded, the crystal cracked and crumbled to dust. The holographic displays flickered and went dark. No, Thorgak roared. You destroyed it. You destroyed the most powerful technology in the galaxy. No, Babloo said calmly. I passed the test. The builders didn't want someone to have their technology. They wanted someone to prove that the galaxy was ready to move beyond the need for such power. As they spoke, alarms began blaring throughout the ancient ship. The power that had kept it running for thousands of years was finally failing. We need to leave now, Luis announced. The whole ship is shutting down. As they evacuated the dying vessel, David realized that Babloo had won both parts of the challenge. He had reached the builder technology first by understanding what it really was, and he had made better use of it by choosing wisdom over power. But David also knew that Thorgak would never accept this victory. The real test was just beginning. The Drakmori homeworld appeared on their view screen like a burning jewel against the black of space. David had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying. The planet was covered in cities that looked like they had been carved from volcanic glass, with spires that reached up toward the sky like claws. Ships moved constantly between the planet and its 12 moons, all of them built to look like sleeping dragons. But something was wrong. Even from orbit, David could see fires burning in some of the cities. Ships were fighting each other in the space around the planet, their weapons lighting up the darkness with deadly flowers of energy. Civil war, Babloo said quietly, standing beside David as they watched the battle below. The young dragon was now almost full-grown, as tall as David and covered in magnificent bronze scales that shifted color in the light. His wings had developed enough for short flights, and his voice had deepened into something that commanded attention. How do you know? David asked. Because of me, Babloo replied sadly. Because of what I've learned from you and the others. It had been 6 months since the incident with the builder ship. Word of what Babloo had done there had spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. The story grew in the telling, until every spacer's bar and communication network was buzzing with tales of the Drakmori prince who chose wisdom over power, who protected instead of conquered, who had been raised by humans to value life over victory. The effect on young Drakmori had been immediate and dramatic. For the first time in their species' history, Drakmori children began questioning their elders. They asked why they had to learn to fight before they learned to think. They wondered if there might be better ways to solve problems than simply burning everything that disagreed with them. Patricia had been monitoring Drakmori communications for weeks, and the reports were alarming. Traditional families are sending their children away to be purified, she told David. But the children are running away instead. Some are even trying to leave Drakmori space entirely to find human teachers. And Thorgak? David asked. He's declared himself the protector of traditional Drakmori values, Patricia replied. He's gathering support from the older generation, the ones who remember the days when the Drakmori conquered everything they could reach. Dr. Miller had been studying the situation from a biological perspective. It's fascinating, she said. Babloo has essentially become a new type of Drakmori, and because the young ones see him as their future leader, they're trying to become like him. Which means they're becoming more human, David realized. In their thinking, yes. They're learning empathy, cooperation, problem-solving through discussion rather than combat. They're becoming something the galaxy has never seen before. But not everyone was happy about this change. 3 days ago, they had received a message that changed everything. It came through official diplomatic channels marked with the seal of the Drakmori Empress herself. The message was simple: bring my son home. Now they were here, in orbit around the Drakmori homeworld, watching a civilization tear itself apart. David felt responsible for all of it. Are you sure about this? He asked Babloo for the 10th time. I'm sure, Babloo replied. My people need me, and I need to face whatever comes next. Their ship was met by an escort of Drakmori vessels unlike any David had seen before. These ships were sleek and elegant rather than aggressive, painted in blues and golds instead of the traditional red and black. The pilots who contacted them spoke in calm, respectful voices. Prince Babloo, one of them said, Empress Valaria awaits you in the Palace of Wisdom. We are honored to guide you home. The flight down to the planet's surface took them over cities where David could see the evidence of conflict. Some districts burned while others celebrated. Crowds of young Drakmori gathered in public squares, many of them wearing blue and gold ribbons that Patricia said were symbols of the reform movement. The Palace of Wisdom was built into the side of an ancient volcano, its walls carved from black stone and decorated with crystals that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. As their ship landed, David saw Drakmori guards wearing the new blue and gold colors standing alongside traditional warriors in red and black. The tension between the two groups was obvious. Empress Valaria was waiting for them in a chamber so large that David's voice echoed when he spoke. She was magnificent, easily twice Babloo's size, with scales that seemed to contain the light of stars. Her eyes were the same golden color as Babloo's, but ancient and filled with a sadness that made David's heart ache. My son, she said, and her voice was like distant thunder. You have grown. Mother, Babloo replied, and David heard years of longing in that single word. For a moment, the Empress looked only at Babloo, and David saw something he had never expected to see in a Drakmori's eyes. Love. Pure, overwhelming, parental love. I thought you were dead, she whispered. When Elder Kieran's ship was found destroyed, when you were nowhere to be found, I thought I had lost you forever. Kieran saved me, Babloo said. She gave me to David and his crew. They raised me, taught me, loved me. The Empress turned her attention to David for the first time. Her gaze was so intense that he had to fight not to step backward. You are the human who stole my child, she said. No, David replied, forcing his voice to stay steady. I'm the human who was asked to save him. And what have you made of him? The Empress asked. My son was supposed to become a great warrior, a conqueror who would expand our empire across the stars. Instead, I hear stories of mercy, of protection, of weakness. You hear stories of wisdom, David corrected, of choosing to build instead of destroy, of becoming something better than what came before. The Empress was quiet for a long moment. Around the chamber, David could see other Drakmori watching intently. Some wore traditional colors and looked angry. Others wore the new blue and gold and seemed hopeful. Show me, the Empress said finally. Show me what my son has become. What followed was the strangest conversation of David's life. For 3 hours, Babloo spoke about his time with the humans. He talked about learning to control his fire through breathing exercises rather than through anger. He described helping repair their ship, not because he was ordered to, but because he wanted to contribute. He explained how he had learned that protecting others felt better than conquering them. But you are still Drakmori, the Empress said when he finished. You still have the fire in your blood, the strength in your claws. How do you reconcile this with human softness? It's not softness, Babloo replied. It's strength. It takes more strength to choose mercy than to choose violence. It's easier to destroy than to create. Humans understand this. The Empress turned to David again. And you, human? What do you say to those who claim you have corrupted my son? David thought for a moment before answering. I say that Babloo chose who he wanted to become. We just gave him options that Drakmori children usually don't have. And if I command you to leave him here, to let him take his place as heir to the throne? David's heart clenched, but he forced himself to answer honestly. Then I would respect his choice. Babloo is old enough to decide his own future. The Empress looked surprised. You would give him up? After all this time? I would give him the freedom to choose, David corrected. That's what love means. For a moment, the great chamber was completely silent. Then the Empress did something that shocked everyone present. She smiled. "I see," she said. "You have taught him well, human David Ross. You have given my son something that no Drakmori parent has ever given their child. You have given him a choice." The Empress stood and spread her enormous wings. "My son," she said formally, "you are the heir to the Drakmori throne. You can claim that inheritance now and rule as your ancestors have ruled. Or you can choose a different path. The choice is yours alone." Babloo looked at David, then at his mother, then at the assembled Drakmori watching from around the chamber. David saw tears in the young dragon's golden eyes. "I choose both," Babloo said finally. "I choose to be the heir to the throne, but I also choose to change what that means. I want to rule not as a conqueror but as a protector, not as a warrior but as a teacher. I want to help my people become something new." The Empress nodded slowly. "And if the traditional Drakmori refuse to accept this change?" "Then they'll have to choose too," Babloo replied. "They can join us in building something better, or they can continue to live in the past." Outside the palace, David could hear the sounds of celebration from the reformed districts and angry roars from the traditional strongholds. The civil war was far from over. But as David watched Babloo stand beside his mother, no longer the small frightened hatchling he had rescued, but a young leader ready to transform his entire species, he felt something he hadn't expected. Hope. The galaxy was about to change in ways no one could imagine, and it all started with one simple choice: to raise a child with love instead of hate. The great amphitheater had been carved from living rock thousands of years ago, its curved walls rising up toward the open sky like a flower made of stone. Today it held representatives from every known species in the galaxy, all gathered to witness something that had never happened before: the coronation of a Drakmori leader chosen by vote rather than conquest. David stood with his crew in the section reserved for honored guests, still hardly believing what he was seeing. The civil war had lasted 8 months, but it had ended not with devastating battles but with young Drakmori simply refusing to fight. Instead of following the old ways of settling disputes through violence, they had demanded something revolutionary: the right to choose their own leader. "Look at them all," Patricia whispered, gesturing toward the crowd. The amphitheater was filled with Drakmori of all ages, but David noticed that the younger ones far outnumbered the older. Many wore blue and gold ribbons, the colors that had become symbols of the reform movement. Others wore simple white bands around their arms, indicating they were neutral, but wanted change. "Where's Thorgak?" Gary asked quietly. "Gone," Luis replied. "He and about 2,000 traditional warriors left for the Outer Rim last month. They said they'd rather live in exile than watch their people become soft." Dr. Miller adjusted her instruments, still fascinated by what she was observing. "This is unprecedented," she said. "An entire warrior culture transforming itself peacefully. The biological implications alone are staggering." A deep horn sounded, its note echoing off the stone walls. The crowd fell silent as 2 figures emerged from the tunnel that led to the center of the amphitheater. Empress Valeria walked first, her massive form moving with stately grace. Her scales had been polished until they gleamed like black mirrors, and she wore a crown of crystallized fire that had been worn by Drakmori rulers for 3,000 years. Behind her walked Babloo, and David felt his breath catch. The young dragon had grown magnificent during the months of upheaval. He stood nearly as tall as his mother now, his bronze scales shifting between gold and copper as he moved. His wings were fully developed, and when he spread them slightly in greeting to the crowd, they cast shadows like beautiful stained glass windows. But it wasn't Babloo's physical growth that amazed David most. It was the way he carried himself. Gone was the playful hatchling who used to curl up in David's lap. In his place stood a leader, someone who radiated confidence and wisdom and an unshakable sense of purpose. "Citizens of the Drakmori Commonwealth," Empress Valeria announced, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the amphitheater. "Today we witness the dawn of a new age. Today we choose not just a leader but a new way of being." The crowd stirred with excitement. For weeks, Babloo had traveled to every major city and settlement, speaking about his vision for the future. He had talked about cooperation instead of conquest, about building rather than burning, about using Drakmori's strength to protect the weak rather than dominate them. "The old ways served us well when we were young as a species," Babloo had said in his speeches. "But we have grown. We have learned. Now we must choose who we want to become. The response had been overwhelming. Young Drakmori flocked to hear him speak. Even some of the older generation had begun to listen, intrigued by ideas they had never considered before. But the choice is not mine to make, the Empress continued. For the first time in our history, you will choose your own leader. You will vote not just for a ruler, but for the future you want to build. The voting process took hours. Every adult Drakmori on the planet had the right to participate, and they came forward one by one to cast their ballots. David watched in fascination as ancient warriors stood beside young hatchlings, all of them participating in something that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. When the counting was finished, the result was announced by Elder Corvain, one of the few traditional leaders who had supported the reforms. By a margin of 73%, he declared, the Drakmori people choose Prince Babloo as their first elected leader. The roar that went up from the crowd was unlike anything David had ever heard. It wasn't the aggressive battle cry of traditional Drakmori celebrations. It was something new, the sound of hope, of joy, of a people choosing their own destiny. Babloo stepped forward to receive the crown from his mother. But as she held it out to him, he gently pushed her hands away. No, he said, his voice carrying clearly across the amphitheater. I cannot wear the crown of conquest while trying to build a kingdom of peace. Gasps echoed from the crowd. The crown had been worn by every Drakmori ruler for millennia. Refusing it was almost unthinkable. Then what do you propose? The Empress asked, though David could see she was smiling slightly. Babloo reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out something small and simple. A blue ribbon like the ones worn by reform supporters, but woven with threads of gold and silver. I propose we create something new, he said. A symbol not of power over others, but of service to others. He tied the ribbon around his forehead and the crowd erupted in cheers again. But this time, David noticed, Drakmori throughout the amphitheater were pulling out their own ribbons and tying them on in imitation of their new leader. Citizens of the Commonwealth, Babloo said when the noise had died down, I accept the honor you have given me, but I do so not as your ruler but as your servant. Together we will build something the galaxy has never seen, a nation of dragons dedicated to protection rather than destruction. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. But for David, the most meaningful moment came on the evening of the coronation, when Babloo found him sitting alone in the garden outside the palace. You're leaving tomorrow, Babloo said, settling down beside David with the easy grace of a predator who had chosen to be gentle. It's time, David admitted. You don't need us anymore. You have your own people to lead now. I'll always need you, Babloo replied quietly. You taught me everything that matters. But I understand. You have your own life to live. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out over the Drakmori home world. In the distance, David could hear singing from the city below, voices raised in celebration of their new future. David, Babloo said eventually, do you think we did the right thing, changing so much so quickly? David considered the question carefully. I think you gave your people a choice they never had before. That's always the right thing. Even if some of them chose to leave rather than accept the changes. Especially then, David replied. Freedom includes the freedom to disagree. Thorgak and his followers have the right to live as they choose, just like you have the right to lead those who choose to follow you. Babloo nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about starting an exchange program. Young Drakmori could spend time with human families, learning how you raise children, and human children could come here to learn about Drakmori culture and history. That's a wonderful idea, David said, though I'm not sure how human parents will feel about sending their kids to live with dragons. Babloo laughed, a sound like warm wind chimes. I think they'll be surprised. We're not as scary as we used to be. The next morning, David and his crew prepared to leave. The Empress had offered them a new ship, faster and more advanced than their old exploration vessel, as thanks for their service to her son and her people. As they said their goodbyes, Babloo pulled David aside one last time. I have something for you, the young leader said, holding out a small crystal pendant. It's a communicator. If you ever need anything at all, just speak my name and I'll hear you. David took the pendant, feeling its warmth against his palm. I should be giving you something. You're the one who's about to change the galaxy. You already gave me everything, Babloo replied. You gave me love and patience and the chance to choose who I wanted to become. That's the most precious gift anyone can receive. As their ship lifted off from the Drakmori homeworld, David watched through the view screen until the planet was just another point of light among the stars. But he carried with him the knowledge that he had witnessed something extraordinary, the birth of a new kind of civilization. 6 months later, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Drakmori ships were appearing at disaster sites not to conquer, but to help with rescue efforts. Young Drakmori were enrolling in universities on dozens of worlds, studying subjects like medicine, engineering, and diplomacy. The Commonwealth had established the first Drakmori hospital, the first Drakmori school that taught cooperation alongside traditional subjects, and the first Drakmori diplomatic corps, dedicated to peaceful resolution of conflicts. But perhaps most importantly, other species were starting to pay attention. If the mighty Drakmori could change so fundamentally, what did that mean for everyone else? Conversations about child-rearing, about education, about the values that societies chose to teach their young, were happening on worlds throughout the galaxy. David received regular messages from Babloo, updates on the Commonwealth's progress and requests for advice on various challenges. But the message that meant the most to him came almost a year after he had left the Drakmori homeworld. "David," Babloo's voice said through the crystal communicator, "I wanted you to know that today we opened our first kindergarten. 20 little Drakmori hatchlings, learning to play games instead of practicing combat techniques, learning to share instead of dominate, learning to ask questions instead of simply accepting what they're told." The message paused, and David could hear the sound of young voices in the background, laughing and chattering in the way that children do everywhere. "I watched them today," Babloo continued, "and I remembered being small and frightened on your ship, learning that the world could be kind. These hatchlings will never know that fear, David. They'll grow up believing that the universe is a place where love is stronger than hate, where wisdom is more valuable than strength." Another pause, longer this time. "Thank you," Babloo said finally. "Thank you for teaching me that the most powerful thing anyone can do is choose to be gentle. The galaxy is changing, David, one small dragon at a time." David smiled and looked out at the stars streaming past his ship's windows. Somewhere out there, a new generation was growing up with dreams instead of nightmares, with hope instead of hatred. It had all started with one simple act, saying yes when a dying mother asked him to love her child. And that, David realized, had made all the difference.